Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Hannah Mindell. I am one of the business advisors here at Work Avenue, and this is our very first virtual Startup Central. So usually we would have you all in our space in Finchley, and for some reason we can't do that at the moment, so we thought we'd go virtual instead. If you look on your screen, you will see Debbie Sheldon, who is our CEO. She's waving. For once, I have the power to mute her, so I'm using it to the best of my ability. And hopefully at the top line of the people that you're looking at, you will see Julian Saipe, who is our speaker for this session. Julian is a leadership and executive coach, and we have been lucky enough to have him speak at a Work Avenue event before, actually, and I wasn't lucky enough to see him, and we had excellent feedback, so I'm really looking forward to hearing his session today. We've got 45 minutes. Julian's going to talk for about 20-25, and then we'll have a chance for questions at the end. I am going to make Julian the host so he can share his screen. So that means if you have any questions, it's really much better if you put them on the chat and you write them to everyone rather than writing them to the host, because I won't be able to see them until Julian hands back the hosting to me. Bear with us, it's all technology and we're trying to use it to the best of our ability. So without further ado, I am going to make Julian the host and hand it over to him.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Lovely to see all your faces, and I'm really pleased that I can see you, because traditionally these webinars are sort of you're talking to nobody. Actually, I'm just letting people into the waiting room here. So great to see you all. Just to give you a little bit of introduction about who I am and what I do. My background actually is in business, and in 2003 I started a hospitality company for which I was the CEO for 15 years, and in 2018 the company was acquired, and I suppose my whole business journey was about transformation and scaling this business and managing people and growing a leadership team and a great brand. And I suppose when I talk about business and coaching and success, I talk more about transformation rather than sort of quick fix answers. So the spirit of today's webinar, which actually is entitled "A Strategy for Hope and Success in Challenging Times," is how to manage the sort of the landscape, the psychological landscape that we're faced with COVID and the uncertainty that we're living with. Alongside my business career, I was also really interested in humanistic psychology, both as a practitioner and a participant of all sorts of different forums. So when I sold my business and had this new kind of chapter in my life, I got into coaching, which I'll tell you more about later, which really is a crystallization of everything that I'd done in terms of personal development and psychology, but also the business journey that I had as well. So this is a great space at the moment in terms of a chance for us all to think about reinvention and how we pivot ourselves in this new normal they're talking about post-COVID. And what I'd like to do today actually is to highlight a coaching framework that I work with. It's a solutions-focused approach to solving problems and challenges. And I'm going to work through that framework in some detail and explain it, and then perhaps we can have a talk about it afterwards. So I think that's it for me. I'm host, so I'm letting people into the webinar as we speak. So what I'm going to do now is share my deck with you. And just, Hannah, give me a wave if you can see it. Great, fantastic. Okay. So before we talk about the coaching framework, excuse me, before we talk about the coaching framework that I mentioned, I'd just like to paint a picture of where we are right now. And on the left, you'll see we start with uncertainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And I'm assuming that many of you are entrepreneurs, you're business owners, and you're here because you want to get involved in a discussion about how we manage uncertainty and the anxiety that comes with it. And of course, when we feel out of control, we become anxious. And how do we deal with that? And I think the starting point for dealing with it is a reality check. If we can't get real and embrace the discomfort of uncertainty and the challenges that gives us, then we really aren't in a position to build something going forwards. So reality, you know, what is really happening now? What is happening for my business? What is happening for me is the starting point for you know, what we talk about as acceptance. And when we can sit calmly with poise and reflect both on what's happening externally, but also what's happening internally in ourselves, and we find some inner calm to have a real dialogue, then we can start to build some hope. And the image that you see in front of you, the fertile void, is actually the cover of one of my favorite coaching books by a gentleman called John Leary Joyce. By all means, read it. John is the founder of the Academy of Executive Coaching. And I think the title kind of explains it all. That in some respects, we are sitting in this void. We don't know what the future holds. And, you know, many businesses are having to pivot. They are having to restructure their organizations. They're having to lay people off. They are having to reinvent their budgets. And so there's a lot of uncertainty around. But if we can sit with the uncertainty and actually acknowledge it, then in that moment, we start in a new way of thinking. And the fertile void is about creativity, co-creation in this very unusual paradigm that we're living in. So that's really me painting a sort of a picture of the landscape outside ourselves and also how we're going to manage it internally. So moving on, if my slide moves on. There we go. Okay. So just a few more sound bites, just a few things to think about before we come to the coaching practice itself. There's a lovely quote from Einstein, and he says, "We have to look for what is and not for what we think should be." And is related to reality and acceptance and learning from real experience. And should is it's a sort of fantasy of where we ought to be. And I think should is a very punishing word, because we all beat ourselves up about who we should be, how our businesses should be performing. And every time we do that, we kind of come crashing down because we've set ourselves up for something that isn't real. So please, let's take this in the spirit of this session is, you know, what is real? Where am I now? Rather than some kind of self-appraisal of how well am I doing? And so just below the bullet points, I've put, you know, learning is the route to growth. What can we really learn from where we are right now? And when we reflect, that moment of self-reflection brings us in touch with who we are and our purpose, actually. And purposefulness, difficult word, purposefulness is the fuel for which we build great things, because it belongs to our essence. It belongs to our talent, our skills, our creativity, and all the things that make us unique and who we are. So I put purposefulness and not self-validation. So we can't wake up each day and assess our progress based on some kind of metric of, am I doing well? Am I doing badly? Because as soon as we enter a judgmental space, we're already in trouble. Because then we're in a sort of winning or losing paradigm. And actually what I'm inviting you to do is to tap into who you are and your own resourcefulness. And just one last thing before we come on to the process itself, be micro-ambitious. And this is what this whole coaching framework is going to show you, that by being micro-ambitious, we're shining the badge right in front of us. We're doing what we need to do today so well and with the right intention and mindfulness that it takes us forwards to the next day. And this is about it's a kind of one step at a time program. And this is my sort of antidote to dealing with anxiety when we don't quite know what the future holds. Okay, so. Oh, just press something I didn't want to. Here we go. So let me tell you about coaching. When I sold my company in 2018, I got very involved in all sorts of things as a consultant, as a mentor, as an advisor, as an investor. And the trouble I had with all those spaces was I was giving something based on my own experience and my own challenges and what I learned on my own journey. And where I felt that dynamic failed was what was good for me and what I learned wasn't necessarily what would be good for my clients. And that consulting kind of and advisory kind of relied on a transference of my wisdom to your wisdom. And in that transference moment, it sort of fell down because, as I said, what was good for me isn't necessarily good for you. Now, coaching comes from a very, very different place, as you'll see from the cartoon. You have all the wisdom, you have all the resourcefulness and the potential. And actually, we are our unlimited source of brilliance and magic. And coaching untaps that know-how and that potential, because your journey is going to be very different to my journey. And so now as a coach, I work really as a facilitator for your own inner dialogue. As opposed to, if I tell you what you need to do, I've given these talks before and people come to me, what should I do? What should I do? And if I tell you what you need to do, at some level, you will resist it. And actually that's now informing cultural change in organizations, the whole control and command approach to management and how we empower people. If you tell people what to do, at some level, they kind of resist. However, if you tell people, how do you see this? Or how does success look for you? Or where would you like to go? Suddenly there's an enabling dynamic in that conversation that produces a very, very different result. So coaching is all about that, really. So moving on, let's now look at this particular framework that I mentioned at the beginning. Apologies again, we get continually people ringing on the doorbell of our webinar and I'm letting them in. Okay, so this is the framework. It's called OSCAR. So OSCAR, O-S-K-A-R, is an acronym for outcome, scale, know-how, action, review. And when I trained as a coach, you learn many, many different coaching frameworks, all proven, and they've got science and psychology behind them. But this belongs to the solutions-focused approach. And I think having a little framework that's going to help us manage our anxiety as entrepreneurs is a really great thing to have up our sleeve. Of course, there are other frameworks as well. There's Gestalt coaching and there's linear coaching and goal-focused coaching, but this is solutions-focused approach. So what I'm going to do now is go through each stage of this framework and explain how it works. And actually, it's very, very simple. So forgive me if I'm any of you know this or preaching to the converted, but I still think that in simplicity, there is, it makes things very uncomplicated and a good way to move forwards. So outcome, scale, know-how, action, review. So let's look at outcome first. So what would a positive outcome look like? Where are you now? And if I asked you to choose a particular topic or outcome, what would it be? And I'm not talking about a long-term goal. I'm talking about something that's tangible. But the question is, what am I hoping to achieve? And the outcome could be a fulfillment goal. So I've been made redundant, or I'm furloughed, or I'm reinventing myself professionally. So my goal is to find my purpose. Or it could be an action goal, something I really want to do. And I've actually put here, create a podcast, because that's something I'm doing myself. Or a topic goal. There might be a specific issue for which a positive outcome would be a bonus. For example, I put here, overcoming conflict with a business partner. So this is very much about getting from A to B. What is your A? What is the reality? And B, where would you like to be? So that is the outcome. Okay. So we move on now to S, the S of Oscar, which is scale or scaling. And this is about giving yourself a score. So in terms of what I would like to achieve, where am I now on that scale? And actually people love this. It's a scale of 0 to 10. And I go, someone says, I'm feeling this, or I'm trying to do this, or I'm struggling with this. And I go, where are you now on that scale? And most people go, well, sometimes I wake up and I'm more of an 8. And then other days I wake up and I'm more of a 2. And I go, that's an emotional scale. And that's not going to help you, because that scale is a barometer for your mood or your confidence. And actually what I'm asking is to score yourself based on what is really going on. So for example, in my situation, creating this podcast, where am I now in producing this podcast series? Not how am I feeling about it, but where am I now? So the reality is I'm probably on a 3 or a 4. So making sure that score is real without judgment is an important part of assessing this journey towards a successful outcome. Okay, so K of Oscar, O-S-K-A-R, K is for know-how. Okay, so I've given myself a score of 3 out of 10 for my podcast success journey. This is where I am at the moment in that preparation journey. So the first question is, what did I do to get to 3 out of 10? No one is a 0 out of 10 in terms of their intended outcome, because even the inspiration for the outcome is a starting point. So no one is 0. But even if your score is low on the scale, the question is, what did you do to get there? And that very question asks you to reflect on who you are, actually. Because in that moment you go, who am I? How did I get here? And I got here based on my purposefulness, my enthusiasm for what I do, my ability to engage with the world, to read, to learn, my own resourcefulness, the people that I've asked for feedback. There's a whole bank of resource and experience that I've used to get to 3 out of 10. And I put here, my resources and potential are actually unlimited. And everything I've learned on the way to get to a 3 out of 10 in the making of my podcast series is the knowledge that is the platform for growth. So we very calmly placed ourselves in reality. We're managing our anxiety. We have a reality check on what is happening. This is where I am in terms of my journey. This is how I got here. And then what do I need to do to get to 4 out of 10? And I put the formula there, N plus 1, which means very simply, it's getting even simpler, now plus 1. A truthful identification with the now, and then an assessment of plus 1. What do I need to do to get from 3 out of 10 to 4 out of 10? So A, the next stage, is for action. So when I'm working with coaching clients, I'll say to them, so when we meet next time, when we meet in a month or when we meet in 2 months, and you're on a 4 out of 10, what will have happened? What actions will you have taken to get yourself 1 rung up the ladder? And then, of course, that enabling moment where no one has to be a 10 out of 10 and there's no should be this and no should be that. It's a real identification with what I love doing, my purpose, what my potential is. And it's amazing to see people actually go, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And actually I can do this. And it's suddenly becomes a space that's so rich with possibility. And then I'll go, well, that's fantastic. I'm championing you to do these things. That sounds really great. What might stop you committing to those actions? What could get in the way of you going from a 3 to a 4? And how will you stretch yourself to avoid inaction? So I'm now holding the coachee accountable for doing what they say they're going to do. And there's a nice quote there in the picture from Van Gogh, which says, "Great things are done by a series of small things brought together." So to use the metaphor of a masterpiece, a work of fine art, if we should have completed this great masterpiece, how are we ever going to even have the sanity to even start? But a masterpiece is simply a collection of small brushstrokes fueled by purpose. So that's A for action. What am I going to do? And finally, R, O-S-K-A-R, is for review. So review is a really important part of coaching. And I suppose it's the framework version of being kind to yourself in a way and saying, what did I learn about myself? What came up when I considered where I really was and what I need to do to get to a 4? What did I learn? And that moment of evaluation is actually being really kind to yourself and a great tonic for anxiety, because we can only be in the now and we can only work one day at a time. So what have I learned? What have I learned doing this exercise? And what will I do with my learnings? How can I bottle these learnings and take them forwards? And how will I structure this? So we're sort of approaching 20 minutes now, and I'm just the final slide. Just, if you're going to remember anything, remember N+1. Where am I now? How did I get here? And what do I need to do to get to +1? And just to leave you with a really fantastic quote, Dr. John DeMartini, who's a world expert in human behavior. He was a business psychologist and a business consultant. But he says, a master lives in a world of transformation, not in a world of loss and gain. And if we live on a sort of, as entrepreneurs or business owners, on a roller coaster of, am I winning or am I losing? We'll never really make the true progress that we could make if we sit quietly and adopt a reality plus learning mindset. And that's really how we grow. We reflect on where we are. We tap into what is meaningful and where our real potential lies. And we use that as the fuel for learning. But the framework is very special. And I think, please, if you take one thing away from this N+1, what is going to be your +1 action for this week? Okay, thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck now. And I think I need to empower Hannah.
I need that.
to share the screen. I think I'm going to do that by, let me see where I am. Hannah, where are you? Here you are. Right. So I'm going to right click and then
You make me host.
Make you host.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Julian. So it's interesting actually that what you're saying is, so I'm not a coach, I'm a business advisor, so my approach is much more tell, as some of the people who have been on the receiving end of my business advice might attest to on this call. But I often say to people that it's really important to try and take small steps and to build slowly rather than rush into doing a big thing. And I think that's an important message from you. It sounds like it's the same message that you're giving. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, we all need advice and we all need to tap into all the resources we have around us. And, Work Avenue is a great resource. But I think we also, in terms of our internal thinking, we need to each incremental step we take needs to be done mindfully, rather than this kind of, of course goals are important and we need to know where we're going and what we want to achieve. But sometimes the goals are so, especially in this time, they're so elusive. And I think in this time, what I would recommend is that we transpose our super objectives of I want to be a multimillionaire to micro ambitions. And I think that's my point. By all means, have the big goals, but reverse engineer it. What do I need to do right now? And how can I make that shiny badge right in front of me shine even better just by concentrating on that one action?
And I think what I've seen from businesses that we work with who have been, they've been blasted with a whole change in environment and a whole change in how we operate, as we all have as individuals and as businesses. And the ones that I've seen who are thriving have made a small change or just done one small little thing, which has then led on to another thing and another thing. And some of them are doing amazingly in this environment. And I think just by doing that small change, by taking small steps rather than trying to fix it entirely, they were able to achieve that.
Sure. So the buzzwords of this whole last 3 months have been around pivoting and reinvention, and people are doing brilliantly. But I would invite people not just to pivot their businesses, but also pivot how they relate to themselves and how they go about things. Because this actually has been, in some respects, and I know everyone has a different experience, a really great opportunity to make a decision about how we go about our work. What endeavor really means and why we do what we do at all.
Does anybody on the session have any questions for Julian? There aren't any coming through on the chat, but if anybody would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, or if they want to type anything in the chat, I don't want to monopolise him myself. Oh, Debbie Sheldon. See, I couldn't keep her muted for very long. Debbie.
Julian, do you find with some people they're so caught up with their business that measuring in the way that you've said becomes quite difficult, and they can't self-assess where they're at and how they need to progress? And what do you suggest about that, other than obviously taking a coach who can then help you see it? Sure. What can we do ourselves?
So just the words you use, they're so caught up, and as you say the words caught up, I feel this very emotional attachment to what we do. And I think this is really important, because when we're emotionally attached in the kind of, our work, our business becomes the barometer of are we doing well or are we doing badly, then we're in the wrong space. Because actually we've come to business, we've come to what we do because of actually what's meaningful to us. And if we can hold on to purposefulness and, defining ourselves by who we are rather than what we do. I think this is a big problem, for mental health with entrepreneurs, that they believe that business success will define who they are. And of course, it absolutely doesn't. That the success that we're looking for actually comes from self-reflection. What is the essence of me, and what do I bring? I'm personally in my 3rd career chapter, and it's not about what I do, it's about what I bring in terms of what is meaningful to me. So, I think your words are spot on. People are very caught up in what they do, the day-to-day, the anxiety of the day-to-day, as opposed to stepping back and going, what am I trying to achieve here? Why am I doing this? Where am I going? Why is it meaningful for me? How did I get here? And when you reflect on how we get to where we are, we actually tap into this wealth of this treasure chest of being. And what can I take out of that treasure chest to get me one step further? So of course we're busy. We're all busy and we're all running around, but can we make our busyness mindful and fueled by the right energy?
Thank you. Louise, I'm just going to unmute you so you can ask your question, if that's okay. I can't seem to. Okay, thanks.
I've unmuted. Julian, thank you very much. I've just got two questions. Actually, one is a very quick one, which is, you've talked about working with individuals. I was just wondering if you work with management teams, senior management teams as well, because my experience is sometimes working with the coaches when they've worked with not only the individual, but the broader management teams, that's also been very worthwhile. And my other question is, also having worked with a couple of coaches, there are some that I think you described as helping you get from A to B, reaching an objective. And there are some others that I think, which much more along the route, what you're saying, which is to allow the individual to make the changes for themselves and to be able to make sure they have those self-reflection. They are able to self-reflect and self-observe in meaningful ways. So you, at the beginning, you identified a couple of different types of coaches. Have I got that understanding right?
Absolutely. So thank you. Just on the first point about team coaches, yes, I work with management teams. In fact, I'm doing a webinar later at 5 o'clock today on that very thing, getting your team to perform to its best. So I think, you know, teams are complex. And I think there's often with teams, there's one-to-one work to be done, but they're proven techniques about finding the best alchemy in a team. There's a great book that I'd recommend to you all. I think it's Peter Ciccone, called The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. And as coaches, we work on building trust, understanding the other, empathy, overcoming the fear of conflict. And then when we start to put those things in place, then the accountability comes, because actually where there's a lack of accountability, sometimes in teams, it's due to a lack of trust. But team dynamics are very interesting, and I work with teams as well. And then your point about different kinds of coaching. Some people come to coaching because they have a problem, they're stuck, or there's a challenge they need to overcome. Some people come to coaching because they are high performers, and you know, the same way that a top tennis player would have a coach, you don't want to fall below your very best. So it's the kind of the constant MOT of checking you're totally on form. And some people come to coaching because they're simply trying to get from A to B. So they're broader fulfillment goals, and those fulfillment, a fulfillment project takes longer. And then they're mini topics. How to have, I need to have a complex conversation with someone at work, and how to have it. And those can be dealt with quite effectively and simply. And then within those different profiles, there are also many different kinds of coaches: psychological coaches, solutions focused coaches, challenger coaches. There's some coaches that will really challenge you. Some people really like being challenged because it really deals with, we all have limited thinking, and we don't know we have limited thinking until someone challenges us on it. So challenger coaches can be very effective.
Really
I hope
helpful.
that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, very much so. Thank you, Julian.
Julian, we've had some questions in on the chat. So one of them is, what is your advice for self-reflection for people who work on their own? It's quite difficult. We always talk about running your own business being quite lonely, and you've only got your voice in your head. So I think that's a pertinent question.
Wayne is holding his thumb up. So did that question come from Wayne?
Yes, it did.
That question touches me, and I relate to it because having sold my company and come out of working with hundreds of people, I was on my own, and that's not fun actually. And one of the lovely things I did when I studied at the Academy of Executive Coaching, and I was a student, and I had this fantastic cohort of classmates. And what I've since gone on to do is not actually start a business with anyone, but really co-creating projects with all sorts of different people. And I think working with people is incredibly important. And so I wonder if there is a middle ground between being employed or being a solopreneur, as they call them, or working in a large company, and actually still having your own business and being, you know, it's your show, but why not co-create something with a colleague or someone that thinks the same way as you, and produce something that's meaningful to your business and meaningful to them, which gives you contact, because we all need contact, as opposed to, do I or don't I get a business partner? Do I scale this company? Maybe there's a different way that we can create things, co-create with like-minded people, interesting projects.
I've had a couple of requests for author or book advice. So anything that you would recommend our budding entrepreneurs read that would help them. Do you have a book?
Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results. Atomic Habits by James Clear. There's another book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think those two relate well to what we've been talking about today. Okay. Stephen Covey in Highly Effective People talks a lot about self-responsibility and not reacting to situations. I think as an entrepreneur, I relate back to my own journey. When we wake up each day and we react to the circumstances, did our client give us a job? Did they not? When we're in a reactive space, we are not effective.
We've had another question that says, a common phrase I have heard is a person who focuses on many things grabs onto nothing. What would you say to someone working towards a portfolio career?
Please repeat that, Hannah, sorry.
A common phrase is, I've not heard it, but is a person who focuses on many things grabs onto nothing. So what would you say to somebody working towards a portfolio career?
I see, a portfolio career. I think if I could use the metaphor of a bicycle wheel, what is at the hub of the wheel? In terms of your portfolio career, you do this, you do that, but what is at the hub? The hub is you. And what is it about you that you bring to all these things? And trying to find the common ground of your purpose and what makes you special, and how you bring those qualities to each of the different things you do will start to give you a clearer idea of why you, it's almost like your personal brand. I mean, in large organizations, they're putting leaders under pressure to come up with their personal brand. What is your personal brand? So I suppose in the example that I'm giving, you know, what is your personal brand? What is the golden thread that runs through your portfolio career? I mean, I imagine in some cases a portfolio could be really different. The things you do, in others, they might have a common thread. But if you think of you as the hub of that bicycle wheel, and the portfolio assets are the different spokes, what is it that binds them? And that is you. And how can you bring a little bit of your magic to each of those things?
Thank you. So talking about magic, we've had a question that says, how do we find and navigate the treasure chest? Do you know what the treasure chest is?
I love it.
Okay.
So if any of you, actually another book I would recommend, and I reread it on a regular basis, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. There's the story of the beggar sitting on the treasure chest, or rather he's just sitting there. I'm sort of just blowing the story. And the passerby, he holds out his hand and says, please help me, I'm poor, I have nothing. And the passerby says, look where you are, look where you're sitting. You're sitting on this chest, and open the chest, and that reserve is all your brilliance and all your magic. And I think we're all vulnerable to believing that there's a better way outside ourselves. We're all looking outside ourselves for answers. And actually the answers are the questions. that when we reflect on what it is we've really got, we tap into that reserve. And I really ask you to try and find a way of thinking and being that is less about what you do, but more about who you are. So that what you do is real endeavor. You know, it's fueled by purpose and resolve, rather than a barometer of, is what I'm doing good enough, or am I successful? And they're quite different ways.
Okay, thank you. Debbie, I'm trying to unmute you, and I think you've muted yourself. So Debbie's got her hand up. There we go.
Just a lot of questions that we seem to be hearing at Work Avenue, because obviously we help people who are developing and starting businesses and those who are in employment. A lot of people who have been in employment find time on their hands now, either due to furlough and potentially facing redundancy. And they're wondering if being an entrepreneur is for them. We all know it's very different, sort of without that structure of being employed. What would you say people should do? And I know there's only a couple of minutes and there's not a lot of time, but what would be the first opening questions that people should be asking themselves when thinking about these options?
I suppose, you know, we as entrepreneurs anyway, you know, whether we're changing career or changing the kind of way we work, you know, that those two questions of, or few questions of, you know, who am I? What is it I really do? What is it that's meaningful to me? And where do I want to go? And I think if those questions become the framework for how we operate, either in the workplace or as entrepreneurs, then at least we are doing some kind of truthful audit about where we are and where we want to go. So that being an entrepreneur doesn't become a label or a way of life. It's much more related to purpose. You know, I'm so engaged with my purpose and what I'm trying to achieve that actually the means whereby I'm going to do it are less important. So looking outside yourself for a sort of career framework as an entrepreneur is probably the wrong way to look at it.
Thank you. I am conscious of time, so I'd just like to draw this to a close. Julian, thank you so much. If everyone wants to use their reactions, we've had loads of thank yous and lots of compliments for you on the chat, Julian. I don't know if you've been keeping up with it, but you're quite popular. So thank you very much. I think it's really useful, and I think actually one of the things that we have received in this in these interesting times that we're living in is that we do have time to think and be more mindful about what we're doing. And I think your session has been a real reminder of how to do that, and how to do that practically as well, rather than just, you know, open thinking. So thanks so much. Everyone's saying thank you on the chat. Just a reminder to all of our attendees here that we do have another 2 sessions for you today that are live. So at 11:45, I just had to check my notes, I don't know what time it is anymore. 11:45, you can either join me and the guys from Fix Our Social to learn about social media, or you can join Joanna, our head of business, and Corinne Miller, speaking about a website for your business. And then at 12:30, I think it is, at 12:45, I got it wrong, Debbie can tell me off even on mute. At 12:45, we have our keynote speaker, Josh Kettle, and talking about his business, Shapetastic. And actually, a lot of what Julian has said about thinking about where he was and where he was going to get to and taking those steps will be included in that keynote speech. So Julian, a massive thank you to you. We really appreciate your time and your input today. It's been fantastic. Thank you everybody for joining. If you're joining us for the next one, grab a drink, take a comfort break. I think that's the polite way of saying it. And we will see you in the next sessions, and hopefully back at Work Avenue soon. Julian, thank you again. Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.